Okay. We make a start now because it's been recorded from 6:30. Okay. So anyone who wants to ask questions, we'll do that at the end. I just so warn you, you are being recorded. Okay. So thanks for coming along. I know quite a few of you from work. Some students of mine are here, I've noticed. And I'd like to say special thanks to some of the guys who have come along who took part in my research. Some of my participants are here. And we've even got one that came all the way from Northampton to get here today in the rain and the wind. So I appreciate that. I was a bit reluctant about this title actually, because I don't like using labels such as criminals. But I spent some time a few years ago working in the media, and I learnt early on how essential it is to use a catchy headline or introduction to draw people in. So there was a method in why I chose criminals as a sort of a label, if you like. But normally it's not something I'd like to use. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the background, some of my background, which will give you some idea of why I'm even doing this, and why I'm studying the PhD that I'm studying. I'm going to talk about convict criminology, which would give you even more idea about where I'm coming from. Some facts about prisoner education. If I get anything wrong, Helen, you keep me right. I'm going to talk about the transition from prison to university. I'm also going to talk about the transition from university to prison, and I'm going to expand on these programs that we're currently doing where students are going into prisons to study alongside prisoners. And then I'm going to talk about some of my research findings, which is a PhD that I'm currently doing on ex-prisoners in higher education. I've got about 59 slides, so I doubt I'll get through them all. I might have to rush through, skim through a couple. I'll try not to spend too long on the wordy ones, okay? And then to conclude, I'm going to talk about reflectivity, and I was talking to Helen earlier about this and how much the PhD, how much the field work affected me personally. I'll go talk more about it, but basically there's little talked about in this area. Social sciences don't tend to talk about how it impacts on their own sense of self. Okay, so we'll go through that later on. Background, this is where I started my education. Home House Prison, it's a remand and a convicted prison, so if you get convicted while you're in there, you can actually stay there, but you get shifted over to what they call the dark side. And you realise straight away the different. When you're on remand, you get more privileges. When I was in there, you could have a visit every day. You could have things sent in on a daily. You could have private cash. You could have, you could wear your own clothes. Some guys had Bermuda shorts on and flip flops. You could even have your own quilt cover. As soon as you got convicted, it just all changed. It all went downhill after that. They took you off the remand wing over to the dark side. You had prison attire on. The privileges there was barely any privileges at all. And the wings were more scruffy. And it was quite a culture shock actually. But remand was quite a difficult time because you sort of don't know where you are. You're waiting to be sentenced. Everybody's sort of on edge. So remand can be worse than actually when you start your sentence in a lot of ways. I was inspired by these guys originally, Jimmy Boyle and John McVicker. McVicker was a bank robber, and in the 60s he escaped from Durham jail. I was in Durham jail in the 80s, the early 80s. And I managed to get hold of his book. It was actually banned from the prison, and if you were caught with it, the screws would confiscate it. In case you don't know what a screw is, it's a prison officer. Okay? And I'm not being derogatory by using that term. It's a lifetime habit, I suppose. It did get confiscated, but I managed to read it before it got confiscated. What inspired me about him wasn't his crimes, but his actual educational journey. After he escaped, he was on the run for about 2 years, and when he got recaptured, he came back to Durham, studied A-levels, he went on to get a first-class sociology degree, and then he went to Leicester University once he was released and got a postgraduate at Leicester University, and now he works in the media. He wrote a book about Jill Dandle. He's a sort of media person now. And Jimmy Boyle, he inspired me as well. Similar sort of story, tried to fight the system. Anyone who's been in prison knows you can't fight the system. You can fight it, but you can't beat the system. He was a lifer, and he had quite a bad time in there, but he changed through art, and now he's an international sculptor. So very similar stories, but these guys, I realised that if they could do it, then others can do it. This is a quote from Matt Vicker, and I won't read it all. I'll try not to read off the slides, but that's a quote where basically he's saying that he didn't sort of leave crime because he was rehabilitated. It was just that he found other interests. In his case, education. I was released on parole. I promise this isn't going to be a story all about myself. I'm just trying to give you a picture, okay? A bigger picture. So in February 1998, I got released on parole. I'd enrolled at Northumbria. I'd already passed the exam to get into Northumbria. The crucial point for me was that bridge between getting released and going to university. There was about 8 months where I was basically hanging around. Didn't know anybody. I had to move out to Newcastle. There's nothing wrong with Newcastle, but I couldn't live in the area that I was from because that's where I committed the offences. I was on parole licence. One of the conditions was you get out of the area. So I went to Newcastle, hence Northumbria University. I didn't know anybody there apart from the people I'd associated with in prison. So who did I look up? My associates from the criminal underworld of Newcastle. One of my students, was that me then? I thought it was a microphone. One of my students said to me, is it a criminal underworld in Newcastle? I said, yeah, you could say that. It's been around since about the 60s. He said, well, I never realised. So that sort of dragged me down a bit. And I ended up back in court in 2000. It's still only like 15 years ago, so not really that long ago, but I realised things had to change, and oddly enough, this was the first time I'd been to Crown Court and they'd let me walk out again. And I think the reason for that was the status I was by then, the student. I was doing a degree at university, and I think they saw that as a way of, I had some hope. There was a way out for me, so they spared me jail. And it was a wake-up call as well, because I felt for the first time I actually had something to lose, where in the past I didn't really care. They could have given me 10 years, I would have thought, yeah, okay, fine. But this time I was dreading prison because I felt like I had a lot to lose. So it was the wake-up call I needed, and I transferred to Teesside University, where I finished my degree, and then I went on and did a master's degree in 2003. I actually submitted my PhD proposal, the one I'm doing now, 2003. But for some reason I couldn't get the support, I couldn't get the interest. I don't even know if they took me that seriously, to be honest. And it didn't really go anywhere, and I felt as though I lost heart. I had sort of aspirations even, to enter higher education. In the meantime, I looked for jobs. I won't go into this, but I did work as a chef for a while before I went to prison. So I tried to get back into catering. I had 2 degrees now. I had to explain where I'd been for the last 5 years. So I put the degrees on my CV, and they were suspicious of that, employers, because they thought, well, you're not going to stick around long, you're going to go and get a better job. What they didn't realise was I'm not going to get a better job because I've got a criminal record. So I became disheartened, and I started writing. I got a work as a freelance writer. That's how I entered journalism, because there's a lot of criminals in journalism anyway, so I fitted in quite well. I had no stable work history, so it enabled me to build a CV, a profile, and I did a lot of unpaid work for newspapers, including the York Press, and that gave me a portfolio which I then used and got paid work eventually with that, because I had my name in print, and I was able to use these publications to show the work I'd done. And I became self-employed. I set up a newspaper which is still thriving, and I set up a PR company. And then in 2011, I wrote my autobiography, and about that time discovered the convict criminology, and that's what I'm going to come on to shortly. I was told, any chance to plug your book, do it. 3rd edition, okay. I think I'm going to get it in the libraries. I know Leeds Beckett's got one. York doesn't. So I'm going to see what interest is out there, and then I can tell them how much they need to spend on how many copies they need to buy. So convict criminology, I thought I was the only person in my predicament with like this higher education and a criminal record and these aspirations to go into higher education. I thought, well, there isn't anybody else like me, so I'm in an impossible situation. I might as well just give up and forget I ever went to university. And then I came across these guys. This Professor Stephen Richards from the US contacted me after seeing my book that I put online, asking me to contribute to his book that he was writing. And I got to know them a bit, and I discovered there was a British Convict Criminology. Basically, it's an organisation of former prisoners turned academics. One thing I have noticed, over there, over the water, there's quite a few professor ex-cons, but I haven't come across one in the UK yet. A few PhDs, definitely senior lecturers, but not a professor. So I don't know if that's anything to do with how our system works, whether that's as far as we can go. But it's something I'd be interested to look into further. That's jumping about that, isn't it? This is what they do. They support prisoners. They have a mentoring system for ex-prisoners in higher education, or in education anyway. They have a critical perspective on criminology. In other words, they're very critical about traditional way that criminology has been written. Okay? That's not to say there's anything wrong with how it's been written. It's just that if you've been there and done it, you sort of can bring a different perspective to it. Okay? That's what they're saying. They use this collective knowledge with with organisations to try and influence the way programmes are written and politicians and so on. These are some former convict criminologists, so it's not that new really. There's Professor Tannenbaum. Okay, he only spent a year in jail, but I reckon it was probably quite hard stir back in those days. He was a political activist, and some people refer to him as the grandfather of the labelling theory. Then we had Professor John Irwin, who died not that long ago. He served 5 years for armed robbery in the 50s and was a student of Goffman and Matzer. And he influenced convict criminology. These are the guys that first came out, if you like, as ex-cons turned academics. What I discovered from talking to Andy Aresti, who well, I know Helen knows him, doesn't know about Aresti, but other convict criminologists anyway. By talking to these guys, I learned that there is an increasing trend of ex-prisoners and prisoners wanting to go into higher education. And I was quite interested in this. I wanted to sort of look into it. There's not a lot of previous research done on ex-prisoners in education. There's quite a lot on prisoners in education. So I looked at some recent research by Anne Pike, who I contacted. She'd done a study on prisoners studying at higher level, and followed them later on when they got released. None of them got to where they wanted to be, and that was through things like poor accommodation, discriminative stuff. You know what I'm trying to say. Barriers, that's the word I was looking for. The things that we've been talking about for decades: poor accommodation, living in hostels, going to apply for a course and being told you can't because you've got a criminal record, that sort of thing. So they all ended up back in jail, basically. Only a few got that far. Some they couldn't contact after release. Not everybody wants to be contacted after they've been released. They'd rather put it behind them. Okay, so a few facts about prisoner education. Okay, 40%, 42% even, report of having no qualifications compared to 50% of the working age general population. 50% have the literacy and numeracy skills of an 11-year-old. Now, I always argue that should that be the definition of a person's intelligence, how well they can read and write? For anyone who's been in a prison, you'll know that there's a lot of talent in prison, very lot of artistic talent, and criminal talent too. Some of the things they come up with are ingenious, I can tell you that now. And if this is if literacy and numeracy is a measure of a person's intelligence, then I'm in that bracket as well. Because my maths is atrocious. I couldn't do a GCSE maths now, but I can do a PhD. So, you know, I think sometimes they focus on these things too much. Okay, 42% been expelled or permanently excluded from school. That's quite a pattern, and I saw this in my research as well. This pattern, truancy, deviancy, and so on. Prisoners who attend vocational training are more likely to secure employment. Not sure about that one. Another question I ask is, should prisoner education be vocationally focused? Should it be all about being able to get a job with your new certificates? Education is more about just getting employment. There's a lot of skills you need to learn to be able to hold down a job. Put new batteries in this as well. Tucker argues that to hold down a job you need certain social skills. You need to be able to articulate. You need to be able to deal with conflicts. You need to be able to form this identity with your fellow workers. Basic vocational education that they give you in prisons isn't enough to teach you these things, but higher education works better because it's more longer term. You go into study a degree, for example, you're looking at 3 years. If you're in jail, it's 6. Because the Open University will take you 6 years to get a degree. The transition from prison to university, Dugweed. Have I pronounced that right, Helen? Dugweed. I knew it was something like that. Yeah. Dugweed. At least I got a laugh out of it. I knew how to say it really, I just thought I'd make you giggle. Anyway, that guy in 1998, okay, so he's talking about this transition from prison to university or college. It gives them a more positive identity, institutional identity, than the negative institutional identity that they have in prison. I've found personally going from prison to university not that different. I liked the routine and the structure. I liked the timetables. I liked even going to the canteen to get your meals. You know, little things like that, the basic things for me. That I appreciated that. So university suited me. And also when you're constantly told, no, you can't have this, you can't have that, reminded me of prison as well. As I said earlier, there's also the transition from university to prison. We have currently these programs that are not well, they're new to this country, but they were started in the States Back in was it the 90s, Helen? Inside Out, one of them is called. Basically, you've got about 12 criminology students in the third year, selected. They go in the prison, for 12 weeks, 10 weeks I said, didn't I? And they study a module with the prisoners, so they work alongside. It's not about just going in and seeing these prisoners like a zoo, which is how I used to find it when I used to see people wandering around looking in our cells. We felt like we're in a zoo. These people are going in to study alongside them. It's breaking down barriers on both sides. You've got, guys in there who are not used to middle class people, mixed with middle class people. They're used to their own kind, if you like. So it breaks down barriers for them, but also the students who are not used to mixing with prisoners. And it's worked quite well. What Fiona Neesham said was that she found that when they came to marking the assignments, the prisoners did a lot better than the students, but they had the advantage of already being in there and studied. I see it differently. I see it as because they haven't got a pub to go to. They have to sit in a cell and study. That's why I passed the exams while I was in prison, and I failed everything before I went to prison. There was no pubs in there to distract me. And it's been a life-changing experience, this, and it is developing in other ways. We've got like the Cambridge University equivalent called Learning Together. Okay. Again, it's connecting people. Slightly different, coming from a different angle. The Durham University one is an accredited module. The Cambridge one isn't. I don't know if it'll stay like that. But they're working with different. They're working at Grendon, for example, aren't they? Which is sex offenders.
It's like a
Therapeutic community. So a different type of prisoner. In Grendon, and that's been quite successful too. So we've got Durham working with HMP Durham, that's meant to say Frankland. I was up till 3 o'clock doing it, obviously, So it's not meant to say Franklands, it's meant to say Frankland, okay? And then Low Newton, the women's prison. I was in there, but it used to be male prison. Back in the early 80s. Teesside Junior working on the Inside Out programme as well. I believe they're going to be working with Home House, the one that I was in that I showed you earlier. And I think they'll be working with these other ones as well. Learning Together, we've got Leeds Beckett working with Full Sutton. And Pentonville working with Westminster University. I believe there's the Convict Criminology influence there with Westminster. That's where they all worked. That's up and running and going really well. So on to the research study now. So I'm looking at ex-prisoners in higher education and the impacts it has on the self. Originally I was going to do it on desistance and how education helps the journey of desistance. That means stopping committing crime, for those who don't know. And then I thought, well, I don't think I agree with the desistance theory anymore, actually, because it seems to be all emphasised on the offender changing. It's all about what they have to do. What about society changing towards the offenders? So I went off desistance after a while. Although I'm interested in desistance, I sort of change, and that's what happens on the PhD journey. You maybe start focusing on a specific goal and end up going round like that's a bit, sort of like that. So I started focusing more on the self and the transformation of the identity, how people change on the academic journey. Because for someone who's been in prison, for them to be able to move on, it isn't just about getting a piece of paper in your hand, it's about changing their sense of self, the way they view things, the way they think, the behaviour, even, as much changing the company you keep. You've got to change these things in order to change and move forward. So that's what I've started to focus on, the identities. So So I was interested in this looking glass self theory of Cooley, who talks about this sort of mirror image of ourselves. And within this identity umbrella, I looked at prisoner status. So some of the prisoners who I interviewed had degrees before they went to prison. And their prisoner status was a lot different to those in prison who didn't have a degree. I looked at how their identities transformed over time, how they now see themselves compared to how they used to be. Talked about turning points, which I'll come to shortly. And both positive and negative experiences. Believe it or not, for some, education was a curse. It's like, the way I can liken it to is being blind and then being able to see the world for what it really is. Education had that effect on some of them. They could actually see things that they couldn't before, and to them that was quite traumatic. So the identity transition that I'm talking about, it's socially constructed, so it's not just about how we see ourselves, it's how others see us. It's a two-way contract. If society won't let us reintegrate, and they're going to keep labelling us, and they're going to keep stigmatising us and outcasting us, then we're not going to be able to move forward. We can change. We're trying to do that through going to university, but you've got to let us. You've got to allow us to move forward, and instead of continually sort of labelling us. If you don't, if society doesn't allow you to do that, then we have what is known as self-fulfilling prophecy. I was going to point to one of my students and ask them, but I thought, no, I won't show them up. Transition involves many turning points, as Loeb and Sampson argue. So, for example, finding the right partner, employment, education, all these things these things change your identity. So then you're not just an ex-con. You're a father. You're a husband or a wife. You're a parent. You're an employee. So these new statuses help you transform your identity. It's what Loeb and Sampson refer to as the knifing off of the past. Gluick and Gluick talk about the ageing process, which was recently supported by Sparks and Day, that leads Beckett. They talk about basically getting older, burning out, is another explanation why people stop committing crime. When people say to me, what made you change? Yes, I went to university, but I was still committing crime when I was at university. I was going to university during the day, and at night I was hanging about with villains. What made me change was I got too damn old. I just got fed up with it. I got bored with it. I wanted to change. As you get older, your mind changes. The stigmatisation continues, but not as much as it did when I first came out of prison. Bernard and Maruna talk about hope as being the main ingredient for ex-prisoners and prisoners to keep going and to keep trying to change. The hope that one day it'll be different. Pike's 2014 PhD was touched on this, and her research showed that hope, the student identity that her ex-prisoners had adopted, was what gave them the hope. So no longer just ex-convict, but now student. And once you graduate and you get those letters after your name, you get a degree, you suddenly become, I'm a proper person now. I've got a brain, yes, I'm clever. I'm not the thug that people used to say, he'll never make it, or she'll never make it. I'm actually a graduate now. So my sample, ex-prisoners, yeah. I was going to say ex-offenders, but I changed it to ex-prisoners. I wanted them to have served time so I could get the real sort of essence of how much their identity transformed from the prisoner onwards. Okay, because not all offenders have been in prison and vice versa too. So I wanted to keep it quite narrow. Criteria was age 18 plus, the university entry, typical university entry age. Mixed sample, and age, gender and ethnicity. I didn't set out to specifically have male-females, like 50-50, it just turned out like that. If I'm honest, I didn't expect many women to want to talk about it. But I was inundated, actually. In fact, I had to turn some away because it was just getting too much. And it ended up being, I was able to do a gender comparison then. And it was quite interesting. And it brought out a lot of findings that I knew I was going to find because the researchers said it for years and years. So the youngest was 25, the oldest was 68. All come from different backgrounds and different areas. I interviewed people in Glasgow, Dundee, Belfast. I went to Wales. We did a lot of partying too. Crimes varied from murder to shoplifting, burglary, wounding with intent, theft, drug dealing, and sexual crimes. And that's only the women. I recruited through the prisoner charities, such as the Howard League, Prisoners Educate. Well, the list is there, I won't go down it, but basically, this is how I made my... So I contacted them each individually, because they all have a database of people who have, who they've funded for courses. And I contacted them and they sent out emails for me to all their clients. And then it was up to them as an individual to contact me confidentially. And I thought it's going to take ages, this. I expected it to be like pulling teeth. 9 weeks later, I'd finished my fieldwork. I interviewed 24, and snowball sampling is when you interview perhaps one and they say, oh, I've got a mate, he was in jail as well, and he's gone to university, so I'll put you in touch with him. And this kept going, this kept happening. Each interview was about 60 minutes, some were a little bit under, and some were quite a lot over. I looked into the early... I wasn't going to do this to start with, but I started looking into the childhoods. I didn't really want to go there. I thought it'd be too emotional. Some of the findings I came up with was contradictory to some of the findings that I've read. For example, 10 achieved some qualifications despite the dysfunctional backgrounds. 4 did exceptionally well, got 10 GCSEs, grades A's and B's. To me that's exceptional because I've got nothing. So 6 passed with a range between 2 and 9 GCSEs or O-levels for those older ones. But yet 14 turned to drugs, and 4 developed 4 developed alcohol dependency as well. Most had quite a good start. And I was quite surprised that more than half had come from good backgrounds, good childhoods. They all said that had good childhoods. So I expected it to be mostly dysfunctional backgrounds, so it didn't really pan out as I expected. I found, since I've started this PhD, I've continually found myself disproving myself. I said good. So over half, so 14 came from very stable backgrounds. So that sort of, I had to start working a bit harder then, didn't I? 10 experienced some kind of abuse during childhood. 3 from the 14 suffered either sexual abuse, domestic violence or bullying late in adult life. 5 were victims of both sexual and bullying abuse. 4 were sexually abused, 2 females, 2 males. 1 suffered both sexual abuse and domestic violence. 2 were sexually abused outside the family home during their childhood by neighbours or at school. So what I had to come up with this idea of why all those people have got good childhood. Why did they go off the rails? I don't understand that. And it was mainly down to the social bonds that Sherman talks about. So it was to do with like relationships, family relationships, partner relationships. A lot suffered domestic abuse, strain. I'm using a lot of theory here because I want my students to take notes, by the way. I hope you're taking notes over there. I'm going to be asking questions next week. So strain, financial worries, this idea that if you can't achieve things legitimately, you go and nick it, basically. Then people had traumas in life, and you might think, well, I've been through all that and I didn't turn to crime. But these obviously did, so why some people do, why some people don't, who knows. Then there was mental health issues, such as depression, and developed as a result of alcohol and drug addiction. Female participants had the worst stigmatisation of all. Most focused on what education could do for their families and their children. Men tended to focus on what, and this isn't a criticism, what it would do for them. Women tended to do it as a way of being able to give their kids a better life. They were all treated much harsher by the criminal justice system, as my students will realise that is nothing new. That's the general consensus is that female offenders are treated far worse by the criminal justice system than men. Okay, Debbie, who's a charity worker, she suffered domestic abuse by her partner, finally got the strength to get rid of him, and she got a job, but she'd lost this wage that he was bringing. Yes, he knocked her about, but he supported her. She didn't have any independence, but thankfully got the courage to dump him and start a new life. Unfortunately, she was skint. She got this part-time job and started stealing from her employer with the employer's son. Her abuser, her partner who she dumped, was never sort of brought to justice, and the employer's son who coerced her or encouraged her to steal from his father didn't get any punishment, and they basically threw the book at her. And yet she still says, I deserve what I got, I couldn't blame anything for what I did. So she actually, all the blame is on her. She doesn't see herself as a victim whatsoever. She sees it as all her fault. Maruna talks about the redemption self. This is where people try to put something back. And I sort of see that myself with the teaching. I feel as though when I'm talking to my students about the real life experiences, there's one over there told me the other day, she only comes to my class because I talk about, I give anecdotes about my rich past. This is how I give something back. So I teach from the convict criminology perspective. A lot of them, it's about making amends for your past crimes in a way and giving something back. And this is another thing, what education can lead a person on to do. So 12 have done this through supporting us. 3 are doing this through teaching and sharing their lived experiences. So some of the guys I interviewed were a convict criminologist, the people who founded, just giving their identities away, who founded convict criminology. They all developed more self-confidence, and many now contributing to society. Several work in areas helping others with the same issues. So quite a few who had alcohol dependency or substance problems are working with people who now have the same problems as they did. Of the sample, 5 males and 7 females have used their past to develop a redemptive self. Okay, Melody. Okay, was born into a stable family, she was adopted, and yet it wasn't until she was about 26 or 25 when she found her real family that she felt she found her true identity. Now it happens that her real family that she found was a criminal family, but yet, and because of that, this sort of finding her true self, if you like, she's kind of embraced that criminal identity. Continues to do so. Jimmy's the same. He came from Dundee. He talks about his past being violent at home, at school, and that he believes that this is what led him onto criminality. He became a very violent offender. Talking to him now, you wouldn't think it, but you know, he's done a lot of bird. That's prison time if you don't know. He's done a lot of bird, and he's now doing quite well as a designer. For some, integrating with the student culture was what helped them move forward. Not just getting the degrees. Social environment plays a major part in your criminality. I would say more so than anything else. Some argue otherwise. Some say you're born criminal. I'm not getting into all that. For a lot of people, being able to move into halls of residence enabled them to move away from abusive relationships while they were studying. And I know for a fact Northern College is one where you can actually go and move in while you're studying. That helped one lady get away from an abusive partner. She's excelled. She's doing very well now. And as Judy said, she'd lived rough on the streets. She was a drug user. She was homeless. But she had to get away from the environment. It wasn't enough just to go and study. She had to get away, escape the environment. And as Pike said, most of her sample benefited from belonging to the learning community. And as Judy said, the only people she spent time with for years was other addicts. Okay, so although she's at university now, she's still mixing with the wrong people. So she was able to get away from that and move into halls. And she said she developed this new life, and it was like a revelation because she wasn't being judged. Ruby, she's a care coordinator. When I asked how she now sees her identity compared to the one she used to have, she said, I'm a survivor, an educated lady, survived my time, no matter how much pain I caused other people, the person she damaged the most was herself. Charlie, who's a criminology student, he said the positive consequence in studying is the identity change. And it's the structure and everything that comes with it. You know what I was saying earlier about the structure that I was drawn to? And then Sarah, who works for a prison charity, said it's been the most important thing. She never used to have any, like a CV with skills on, and now she feels like she's got something to offer. Charlie, who we've just been talking about, when we talk about stigmatisation, he struggles with this. He can't deal with what he's done. He's in for wounded with. Sorry, he went to prison for wounded with intent. Used a knife on someone. He's still having counselling, but still struggles with the stigma. The stigma isn't so much from society; it's himself. He can't deal with himself. Dylan, he is a criminology student, and he decided, like I did, to be quite open about his criminal past, and he did that in one of his seminar groups. They completely alienated him, and I asked him, was it like the young ones that alienated you? Not that I'm suggesting that young people are nasty or anything, but I just thought maybe they were too young to be able to deal with that, his past. He said, oh no, they're all like in the 40s and 50s. One was a ex-policeman, one was an ex-prison officer. And basically they were the ones that stirred up the trouble. They used to sit in the lecture theatre giggling, Googling his crimes, reading them out and saying, oh, look what he's done. He had to have counselling for that. In fact, he had to quit and start again because he couldn't cope. They used to invite him for coffee and social gatherings. They used to Facebook him and all that kind of thing. Took him off Facebook. Stopped inviting him to things, and it just got too much for him. So he re-enlisted then. He started his degree all over again, and I'm pleased to say he's nearly there, and he's on target for a first. Again, in Pike's and Farrell's studies, they found that prisoners who were prisoners, the ex-prisoners, the people who I was talking about earlier, who all went back to jail. They were labelled as druggies or ex-offenders, made them feel worthless. Judy again said she had some blood tests. She went to the doctors and had some blood tests. And the doctor gave her a note to take to reception on the way out. And there was a queue and she had to stand in this queue. And she read the note and it had drug dependent on it. And that made her feel like these other people, because this was years ago. You know, this is like 10, probably more years ago, when she was actually into drugs, and they're still giving her that label now. That's the sort of thing Pike and Farrell are talking about. Melody, again, she did her A-level, she did her GCSEs while she was in jail. She wanted to go into social work, but needed to do the diploma in social work. She was told someone with an extensive criminal record like yours will never ever get into university in England or Wales. Well, she did. So that person was wrong. And the more people were told things like this, the more it made them want to prove them wrong. So the more put-downs you got, they got, the more they strived to achieve the goals. Now there was a different batch of people I interviewed, which I wasn't expecting this either, but I found some of them already had degrees first and then went to prison, which wasn't how I planned it at all. They were meant to come out of prison and go to university, not the other way around. I came across this guy Simon. He was a medical student, and he had his upbringing was, he was basically ignored by his dad. So for him to be to have an identity, to be wanted, to be, for people to want to know him, it was essential. Anyway, he started going to this slimming club because he's quite overweight, and in conversation revealed that he was a medical student, and he suddenly got all these friends, and it's the first time he'd ever felt like wanted, important. But then he went a step further, didn't he? And then he became a doctor. So then he started telling people he was a doctor. He wasn't a doctor at all, he was a medical student. But then he started treating people, giving them, false placebos, giving them placebos. Anyway, he got caught, and as a result, got himself ABH, supplying controlled drugs, theft and deception. He went to jail for 5 years. Well, he got 5 years. He was sentenced to 5 years. Because of his education, he was given this sort of prisoner status that was, alleviated prisoner status, if you like, which again fed his need for an identity. And they gave him work mentoring, lesson planning. He wrote a couple of programs, and he was marking. He could do man marking for me, if you like, so I'm sick to death of it at the moment. And it gave him that essential identity that he'd always craved. Now, doing this research as I still call myself an ex-con, and I'm telling people you shouldn't use those terms. As an ex-prisoner, read a chapter by Bill Davies in the Palgrave Handbook of Prisoner Ethnography. Yeah? He talked about when he did his research on prisoners. Now, Bill's got a criminal record too, and he said how when he interviewed prisoners, he only had 60 minutes, so he was quite restricted with the time slots. So in order to enable his participants to open up as quick as possible, he found the best way to do that was by disclosing his past. Otherwise, you would take, 10 minutes, 50, you could maybe take the whole hour just trying to win them over so they'll talk to you. But because he disclosed his history, he felt that they felt more at ease with him and then would open up. So I adopted the exact same method. And I felt it seemed to work for me too. Frank, who was in for drug dealing, he said to me, he said, I can be quite open with you. And I said, is that because I'm an ex-con? And he said, yes, I can open up about it more with you. And he told me things that he wouldn't have told anyone who had not been in prison. So it helped being an ex-prisoner. The downside is, which I'm going to come to again, was because they were more open with me, I got more details than maybe I wanted, if you like, and it had quite a emotional effect on myself. It was important data, but I felt like I got to 24 interviews and I had enough. I actually went to interview 3 at Belfast, where we had a conference, and I ended up just going to the pub with them for 2 days. I'd had enough. I'd had enough interviewing. I found it quite an emotional strain. Limitations of this education process. One of the people I interviewed was a sex offender. That knocked me for 6. When I sat down and said, "Okay, what were your crimes?" and he said, "I abused my 2 daughters," I carried on. I was as professional as I could be, and I tried not to react. It made me think about my own status as an ex-prisoner then, and how I might have reacted 20 years before. But I was now a professional. It made me realise how things had changed for me as well, how much I'd come on. So while I'm learning about these participants' identities and how they've transformed, I learn about my own as well at the same time. He's the only one who hasn't managed to find work or something. He's got quite an exceptional academic record, which he has to do through the OU, Open University, through distance learning. He's been accepted for some charity work, but he can't get paid employment. This is the limitations of this pathway from ex-prisoner to higher education. Sex offenders are in a different category because they're doubly stigmatised. I'm going to talk, well, I've already talked a bit about this already actually, but I'm going to talk a bit more about it. As I said earlier, because of the insider status, I got more information than I bargained for. And I struggled with it, and when I got the transcripts through, I wouldn't read them for about a month. I found it too distressing. When I reread the sex offender transcripts, I really struggled with that, to stomach it. And some of the childhood experiences of people. 3 that I interviewed burst into tears. I left every interview wanting to help them in some way. Those that were struggling financially, I wanted to go to the bank and just send them a few quid and say, "Look, you can do your master's degree now, there's money in the bank," which wouldn't have been allowed, of course. I just wanted to help them in so many ways, because while they're sharing their stories with me, they're talking about my story too. And it was just like this sort of mirror image thing I was talking about earlier, this looking glass self. I found it exhausting emotionally and physically, because I rammed in all these interviews in 9 weeks. So I was all over the country, travelling first class, by the way. But I was travelling all over the place. I found the travelling exhausting. I found when I was staying overnight, I found that quite tiring. I do like sort of being my own place. I don't like staying overnight anywhere. Like I said before, it's quite emotional and challenging for my own sense of self, because while these people are going on their journey of transformation, so am I. It's still continuing. It's a lifelong journey, as is desistance. It doesn't come to a stage where okay, I've changed now, that's it, right, I've desisted. It continues, because there's always somebody that will label you. There's always something that will crop up. You might go for a job and they're going to check you, so I won't bother then. So it never ever goes away. A sentence is a life sentence. You will never shake it off. And people say to me, quite often my students and other people say, "Yeah, but after a certain time it gets wiped off, doesn't it?" No, it doesn't get wiped off at all. Depends how long you've done, and it depends what you're sentenced for, and the sentence you were given. So if you were sentenced to 4 years more, it's on you for forever. It's on your check forever, on your rap sheet. Even minor crimes will stay there, which is ironic, because those that have served the long-term sentences are more likely to rehabilitate, which is a word I hate, but they're more likely to desist than the short-termers that are in and out of jail for God knows how many years. Because their sentences are always short, they become spent, which means they don't have to disclose them after a certain length of time, should they go for a job or insurance. If you've done a long term, you always have to legally disclose that. That encourages people in that predicament not to. And university entry is one thing that I'm going to look at doing some research on. But this barrier of, do you have any criminal convictions, tick the box. There's a thing out at the moment called banning the box. Should you tick the box? Will they check if I don't? No, I won't bother, so I'll just lie. And that's how I used to get through things, just by lying, because I didn't want to lie, but if I didn't, I wouldn't have got a job, so on. They know here, by the way. If they didn't, I've just grasped myself up on this recording. Okay, so that's about it. Those are the references if anyone wants a copy of the slides. Any questions or comments? One at a time, please.